Marcus Liu was in the middle of carefully packing decorations for his brother James's wedding when a loud, impatient knock shattered his concentration. The small boxes of ribbon and table ornaments clattered as he hurried to the door. Having settled in a modest house on Whitfield Lane, Marcus had expected no disturbances that day, certainly not an aggressive demand at his doorstep. Upon opening the door, he found himself face to face with Marietta, his notoriously prejudiced neighbor, her lips pressed into a tight line. Next to her stood a young officer in uniform, Officer Landon, who blinked uncertainly, as if unsure how he'd been roped into the matter. Marcus, taken aback, managed only a polite, "Can I help you?" before Marietta seized control of the conversation. Arms crossed, Marietta claimed Marcus was trespassing on his own property. The accusation floored him. He'd purchased this home precisely to avoid drama, using his savings from a decade of steady work. Now, here was Marietta, accompanied by an officer, implying he didn't belong. A flicker of confusion passed over Landon's face as well, but Marietta's certainty overshadowed any momentary doubt. In that charged instant, Marcus's mind raced, recalling fleeting interactions with Marietta in the past, her pointed stares, her dismissive remarks about certain people lowering neighborhood standards. He'd let them slide, focusing on positivity and ignoring her veiled hostility. But today, it was impossible to remain indifferent. The presence of an officer changed the dynamic from petty neighborly tension into a potentially serious conflict. Marietta insisted that Marcus prove his identity and residence, as though she held authority in that domain. Officer Landon, perhaps swayed by her fervor, asked for Marcus's ID. The request stung, given that Marcus was literally standing inside his own home's threshold. He felt a knot of indignation tighten in his chest, yet he strove to maintain calm. After all, experience taught him that anger could escalate matters dangerously. Still, the humiliation prickled. Being forced to show ID in one's own house, particularly under racist suspicion, was a reality Marcus had hoped to leave behind. Over the years, he'd navigated similar episodes, each leaving a subtle bruise on his dignity. But something about Marietta's brazen confrontation felt more direct and personal this time. Marcus shot a glance at the decorations strewn across the living room. In mere days, James's wedding ceremony would take place, a celebratory milestone overshadowed now by this tension. Landon's expression revealed uncertainty, as if he questioned Marietta's motives. Yet the officer made no immediate move to side with Marcus. Instead, he listened to Marietta's exaggerated complaints about strangers and suspicious activity. Thus, the peaceful hush of Whitfield Lane gave way to an unexpected standoff in Marcus's entryway. Though outwardly calm, Marcus's thoughts churned. He realized that defending his right to be in his own home was only the beginning. This confrontation could unravel in unpredictable ways if he didn't handle it with steady resolve. Marietta glared at Marcus Liu, resolute in her absurd claim that he was trespassing on Whitfield Lane, the very street where he'd purchased his home. The tall, young officer Landon tried to appear authoritative, though the flicker of doubt in his eyes suggested he questioned Marietta's accusations. Standing on the threshold of his own living room, Marcus felt a churn of frustration mixed with disbelief. Marietta insisted that she'd witnessed someone lurking around the property, and that Marcus had to prove he belonged. Landon, perhaps unsure how to handle a scenario so blatantly contradictory, asked Marcus for identification. The request stung, but Marcus complied out of a desire to keep the situation calm. He stepped over to the small side table by the door, retrieving his wallet. "Here's my ID," he said evenly. "And here's my deed paperwork," he added, pulling out a folder. He always kept a copy of the deed accessible, albeit never expecting to use it as evidence in his own home. Marietta's eyes flicked over the documents with a sneer, as though she resented seeing her narrative crumble. Before Landon could fully register the proof, Marietta pivoted, switching tactics. "But how do we know these aren't fakes?" she asked. Her voice dripped condescension. Marcus silently cursed the misfortune of encountering someone so bent on twisting facts. He considered explaining how county records would confirm everything, only to recall that reason rarely prevails when prejudice is involved. Landon cleared his throat, scanning the paperwork. He looked from the address on the deed to the house number visible outside. "It matches," he murmured, half to himself. Yet Marietta refused to concede. She claimed illegal subleasing might be at play, suggesting Marcus was not the real owner but a cunning imposter. A flicker of irritation crossed Landon's face, though he didn't outright dismiss her speculation. Marcus forced himself to remain calm, though a spark of anger threatened to surface. "Ma'am," he said gently, addressing Marietta, "I'm the lawful homeowner here. You've known me for months. Why are you pretending otherwise?" She responded with a stony glare, referencing various elements in the neighborhood and how she wouldn't stand for sketchy individuals. Officer Landon appeared caught in the middle. On one hand, he had a neighbor pushing a narrative of trespassing and suspicious activity, on the other, a homeowner brandishing official proof of residence. Marcus sensed the officer might realize the hollowness of Marietta's claims. Yet fear of undermining a community figure like Marietta, rumored to have ties to the local homeowners board, kept him from outright dismissing her. In that tense moment, the living room loomed like a silent battleground. Marietta, arms folded, refusing to yield, Officer Landon, uncertain which direction to lean, and Marcus, braced for the confrontation's next step. The disarray from wedding decorations now mirrored the turmoil in his mind. Even though logic sided with him, prejudice lurked behind Marietta's unwavering stance, making it clear this dispute wouldn't end easily. Marcus inhaled slowly, willing himself to stay level-headed. After all, James's wedding day was near, and the last thing Marcus wanted was to overshadow it with a neighborhood fiasco fueled by ignorance and bigotry. Jordan Ellis was already reeling from Lorraine's false trespassing accusation when Officer Gable stepped inside his house uninvited. The sudden intrusion on Greenfield Drive, the place Jordan had called home for nearly a year, rocked him. Before Jordan could process the officer's presence, Gable barked for him to produce some identification or face detainment. The demand carried an edge of authority that Jordan suspected was meant to intimidate. In the corner of the room, amidst half-wrapped gifts for Winston's upcoming wedding, stood Lorraine, wearing a triumphant smirk. Her phone was raised, camera lens aimed at Jordan's every move. Jordan recognized that expression. She aimed to twist reality, collecting evidence that might paint her as the victim. Refusing to let adrenaline undermine his composure, Jordan took a measured breath, affirming his right to be in his own home. Politely but firmly, Jordan told the officer, "You need a warrant or explicit cause to search my property." Gable sneered in response, doubling down on the notion that Jordan was suspicious. Lorraine chimed in, referencing past incidents that had never actually occurred, fueling the officer's suspicion. The tension soared. Jordan felt anger burn in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. He'd spent countless hours studying constitutional rights, determined not to be cornered by intimidation or false narratives. Lorraine's phone beeped, capturing Jordan's slight movement as he reached for his wallet. Fearful that the footage might be taken out of context, he paused. Gable noticed the hesitation and seized upon it, raising an eyebrow as though to suggest Jordan was resisting or hiding something. The entire scene reeked of a setup, with Lorraine acting as orchestrator and the young officer unwittingly following her lead. A voice in Jordan's mind reminded him, "Stay calm, avoid sudden gestures." He placed his wallet on the table carefully, flipping it open to show his driver's license. The glare from Lorraine's phone made his skin crawl, but he refused to waver. "That's my ID," he said softly, controlling his tone. "I own this house. The deed is in that folder on the shelf if you need to see it." Yet, Gable showed no sign of backing down. Lorraine's eyes sparkled with malice, as though relishing each moment of Jordan's forced compliance. Officer Gable, nodding at the license, then glanced around the living room, unimpressed. He demanded Jordan follow him outside for further questioning. Jordan tensed. Did Gable plan to arrest him on his own property? Steeling himself, Jordan reaffirmed his boundaries. "I'll talk here, not out on the lawn. We can settle this inside. The standoff felt suffocating, with Lorraine's phone capturing every second. Jordan braced for the possibility that Gable might attempt physical force. The frustration pounded in his veins, but he held on to reason, suspecting Winston would soon arrive. Winston, who had diffused countless conflicts overseas, might prove a critical ally in unraveling Lorraine's hateful charade. For now, Jordan stood tall, quietly fueling his resolve with the knowledge that he was in the right. And that any evidence Lorraine or Gable collected would reflect her twisted motivations. Emmett Caldwell had hoped for a quiet afternoon on Lawson Street, organizing decorations for his brother Russell's upcoming wedding. But the peace shattered when a fervent pounding rattled the door. He found Whitney Smythe standing outside, armed with the presence of Officer Colton. Though initially taken aback by their claim that he might be trespassing, Emmett tried to stay composed, trusting he could clarify the misunderstanding with logic. That notion dissolved the moment Officer Colton marched into Emmett's living room, completely uninvited, demanding to see proof that Emmett owned the property. The heavy tension in the air felt stifling. Whitney hovered at the threshold, phone camera raised, recording every second with a triumphant smirk that made Emmett's skin crawl. Emmett managed a polite greeting, "I'm sorry, but this is my house. May I ask why you're stepping inside without permission?" Officer Colton shot him a narrowed glance, retorting, "We need your ID, or we'll have grounds to assume you're not who you claim to be." The insinuation stung deeply. Why should Emmett prove anything inside the home he'd purchased years ago? Still, Emmett reached for his wallet on the kitchen counter, taking controlled steps to avoid startling the officer. "I can show you my driver's license," he offered. "And my mortgage paperwork is in that cabinet." He gestured toward a small wooden file chest near the sofa, wedding decor boxes piled around it. Before he could reach it, Officer Colton blocked his path, an intimidating posture that signaled he intended to exert authority. "Slow down," he warned, eyes scanning Emmett's movements as though anticipating aggression. A flicker of disbelief passed over Emmett. Did the officer truly believe he was a threat on his own property? Meanwhile, Whitney advanced, capturing every gesture Emmett made on her phone, her lips curving into a sneer. A dull heat flared in Emmett's chest. He'd heard about such incidents, where an innocent person was forced to justify their existence, subject to prejudiced assumptions. Yet, experiencing it firsthand in his living room felt surreal. He exhaled, willing himself to remain calm. "I'm cooperating," he said softly. "There's no need for intimidation." Whitney gave a derisive laugh. "Keep filming," she instructed, presumably addressing herself. She circled the living room to catch a better angle, as though anticipating a meltdown from Emmett. Officer Colton repeated the demand, "Let's see the ID now." Emmett slowly retrieved his wallet. He flipped it open, displaying the name Emmett Caldwell under the bold heading of the state ID. The officer peered at it suspiciously, while Whitney hovered closer with her phone, capturing the ID card on video. Even after reading the details, Colton remained unimpressed. "People forge documents all the time," he muttered. "Where's the deed?" Emmett bristled, stepping around a half-assembled floral arch for the wedding. He rummaged in a file, retrieving a folder with the deed. The official letterhead and notarized seal were plain to see. "This is my property," Emmett reiterated, voice shaking with a mix of anger and humiliation. "You're inside my living room, uninvited, harassing me at the urging of my neighbor." Whitney, still filming, demanded Emmett prove he was a real resident, referencing how strangers sometimes squat in houses. The ridiculousness of the claim burned Emmett from within, but he kept his composure. He scanned the front window, half expecting to see Russell's car pull up, hoping his brother's presence might diffuse the tension. But Russell wasn't due until later in the day, leaving Emmett alone with two individuals bent on questioning his legitimacy. At one point, Officer Colton stepped dangerously close, towering over Emmett to underscore dominance. In that moment, Emmett recalled the self-defense training he'd taken years ago, ironically for worst-case scenarios with intruders or criminals, not uniformed lawmen. He resisted the urge to push back physically. Tension thickened as the officer lingered. Sensing a potential escalation, Emmett calmly repeated, "I have every right to be here. I've cooperated fully. Now, I'd like you to leave unless you have a warrant or probable cause." The officer let out a snort, turning to Whitney as if to confirm something. She nodded, scorn radiating from her posture. The entire standoff hinged on them wanting Emmett to crack, maybe lash out or appear hostile so they could twist the footage. But Emmett had no plans to fulfill their expectations. Instead, he held his ground, intentionally slow breathing to keep adrenaline in check. The wedding supplies scattered around the floor served as a stark reminder of why he needed to keep the situation from spiraling. A big family event was mere days away, and the last thing he wanted was a legal fiasco overshadowing it. Finally, after a silent face-off, Officer Colton grumbled, "We'll settle this, but don't you think we're done here?" and signaled to Whitney they should step outside to discuss next steps. The pair retreated, leaving Emmett's living room awash in tension. Emmett stood quietly, heart pounding, uncertain whether they'd truly leave him be or if a new wave of confrontation awaited once they walked out the door. In that poignant lull, Emmett realized the confrontation was far from finished. Something told him Whitney and Officer Colton would not just abandon their quest to undermine him. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from Russell, maybe. He let out a shaky breath, preparing himself for the next act in a drama he never asked for. For now, he took solace in having remained calm under scrutiny, though the day's ordeal had only sharpened the lines drawn between him, his racist neighbor, and a misguided officer acting on bias rather than reason. Elias Carter had hoped for a quiet evening at Maplewood Terrace. After a long day overseeing logistics for his brother Victor's wedding, he looked forward to relaxing on his front porch, listening to the distant hum of the neighborhood. Instead, he was confronted by Madeline Frost, the local HOA president whose taste for control was matched only by her penchant for stirring trouble. Standing behind her was Officer Gray, summoned by Madeline's frantic calls. Madeline's eyes blazed with self-righteous indignation as she waved a stack of printed HOA bylaws. "I'm here to conduct an unannounced compliance inspection," she declared, as though her personal whim was backed by some undisputed authority. "Your sheds, your driveway, and especially that barn out back. None of it is properly registered. You need to show me your permits." Elias stared at the papers she brandished. He'd lived in his home for over a year and had followed every local regulation to the letter. Yet here was Madeline, brow furrowed, demanding access to his private property without notice. The sheer audacity took his breath away. Before he could respond, Officer Gray stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Sir, we need to accompany her," he said to Elias in a tone that implied any refusal would be met with force. Unannounced inspections are permissible under Section 12 of the Community Code. Elias's jaw tightened. Unannounced? By the HOA? He glanced at the papers. There is no such section. And even if there were, you can't just step onto my property without consent, or a warrant. Madeline scoffed. The HOA has the right to enforce our community standards. We don't need your permission. She offered Gray a triumphant smile, as if she'd orchestrated the entire scenario. Officer Gray looked uncertain. He glanced at Elias, then back at Madeline. "Ma'am, typically we inform residents of inspections in advance," he said, trying to mediate. "But if the HOA insists." Madeline snapped. "I will not tolerate secret structures and unapproved decorations. Now, open your gate." Elias folded his arms. "I'll show you every permit you like, but you're not coming inside. If you think there's a problem, follow the proper procedures, file a formal complaint, and we'll schedule a time." Officer Gray shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, perhaps we should," he trailed off under Madeline's glare. She planted her hands on her hips. "This is an emergency inspection," she declared. "I will not wait another moment." Elias recognized how far she was willing to push. He'd faced down far fiercer opponents in the ring than this self-appointed enforcer. Still, this was his home, and he wouldn't be bullied. Taking a deep breath, he stepped toward Madeline, his posture calm but resolute. "I'm going to record this," he said, pulling out his phone. "Every step of this so-called inspection is going on camera." He tapped the record button and held it up, ensuring the lens captured both Madeline's triumphant face and Gray's conflicted expression. Madeline bristled. "Stop that. You can't film this," she protested. Officer Gray took a step back. "Sir, you're allowed to record on your own property," he said quietly. "Let's just do this by the book." Realizing the tide was shifting, Madeline's bravado faltered. "Very well," she spat, handing Officer Gray her papers. "But I expect you to verify every unregistered structure. I will be back." With that, she stormed off toward the back gate, leaving Gray to offer Elias a sheepish apology. "I'm sorry you had to go through this," Gray said. "I'll look into whether these inspections are actually sanctioned." Elias nodded, lowering his phone. "Thank you," he replied, though his mind raced. The incident had exposed how thin the veneer of community harmony could be when one person decided to weaponize HOA rules. He pocketed his phone and walked inside, determined to prepare for whatever next move Madeline might make, and to remind himself that calm resolve and clear evidence were the best defenses against unchecked authority. After the unannounced inspection fiasco, Darius Blake thought he'd heard the last of Ruth Pendleton's vendetta. Yet a few nights later, as he settled into his armchair with a novel, the shrill ring of his phone cut through the silence. He recognized the caller ID, Ruth's number. Before he could press ignore, her panicked voice blared through the speaker. "He's in my yard again." Ruth screamed. "I don't feel safe. This is harassment." She insisted that Darius was loitering on her property and had made threats. Confused, Darius asked for specifics, but Ruth launched into a litany of claims, none of which made sense. He calmly reminded her that his property was clearly marked and that he lived there. "You're the one trespassing, madam," he said. Ruth, however, had already dialed 911. When the dispatcher picked up, she painted a dire scenario: "A strange man is stalking me, claiming to be my neighbor, but I don't recognize him. He's aggressive and won't leave." She even hinted at a dark past, suggesting Darius might be a criminal in disguise. The dispatcher assured her that police would respond but also asked for her address and details. Within minutes, a patrol car rolled onto Oak Ridge Commons' quiet cul-de-sac. Officer Carmichael stepped out, clipboard in hand. He approached Darius's front gate, calling out, "Sir, I have a report of suspicious behavior. Can you step out and explain?" Darius, still calm, emerged and greeted the officer. "What's this about?" he asked politely. Officer Carmichael explained Ruth's allegations, looking between Darius and the phone. Darius listened and then offered his side. "I'm a homeowner here, sir. My name is Darius Blake. You can see my address on my driver's license." He handed over his ID. The officer glanced at the license, then peered at the house numbers. "Yes, this matches," he said. "Do you know why Ms. Pendleton would call us about you?" Darius shook his head. "We had a disagreement about an inspection, but I've been nothing but courteous. I haven't set foot on her lawn." He recounted the prior HOA incident, describing how Ruth had attempted to conduct a surprise inspection. The officer listened, eyebrows raised. Meanwhile, a few neighbors stepped outside, curious. One neighbor, Ms. Vargas, piped up, "Officer, that man's always been quiet. I saw him the other day planting flowers. He's never been a troublemaker." Another, Mr. Lopez, nodded in agreement. "Ruth's always been quick to complain about the smallest things. This seems over the top." Officer Carmichael considered their statements. He pulled out his radio to check for any prior calls on Darius's address. Finding none, he returned to Darius. "All right," he said, lowering his voice. I'm going to check the footage from the street cameras. If there's no evidence of trespassing or aggression, I'll have to file this as a false report. He glanced at the bystander videos some neighbors had captured on their phones. Each clip showed Darius stepping out of his front door, never crossing the property line. Ruth, from her porch across the way, watched in disbelief. Her phone still recording, she clutched the rail as if expecting to pounce again. When Officer Carmichael told her he'd need to speak with her, she began to sputter, claiming the camera angles were wrong. But he calmly explained that all footage pointed to Darius's innocence. Frustration creased Ruth's face, but she had no choice but to step down. After filing the report, Officer Carmichael issued Ruth a citation for filing a false police report and harassment, serious charges that came with a fine and a warning. As he completed the paperwork, he gave Darius a nod of apology. "Sorry for the trouble, sir," he said. "I'll let you get back to your evening." Darius thanked him, relief flooding through him. That night, Darius lay awake considering how quickly petty disputes could escalate. One minute he was rearranging wedding decor, the next, he faced accusations of stalking. Yet, through it all, his composure and willingness to document each incident had protected him. He thought of his brother, Marcus, who'd stood by him when Ruth first confronted him. Darius resolved to remain vigilant. This was his home, and he wouldn't let anyone's prejudice or pettiness drive him away. After the citation for a false police report and harassment, Evelyn Carter found herself facing the possibility of real legal consequences. The fallout echoed through Cedarview Commons, a once tranquil enclave where petty HOA squabbles now gave way to genuine fear of repercussions. Meanwhile, Liam Henderson felt a cautious relief. The ordeal had tested his patience and dignity, but the legal system had recognized the baseless nature of Evelyn's accusations. But Evelyn, undeterred by a single citation, pivoted to another tactic. She filed multiple HOA complaints against Liam, citing everything from unapproved lawn decorations to unauthorized use of outdoor lighting. Though minor in isolation, the sheer volume of complaints threatened to overwhelm the HOA's capacity to respond, further burdening Liam with paperwork and the stress of constant oversight. Liam, who'd hoped to rebuild a quiet life after retiring from a demanding career in education, saw the specter of harassment looming again. One afternoon, the HOA board called a special meeting to address the flood of complaints. Liam prepared meticulously, gathering copies of each citation, his security camera footage, and testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed Evelyn's earlier misconduct. As he entered the community center, he noticed a small cluster of residents who offered sympathetic smiles. The air was thick with anticipation. Some hoped for a swift resolution, while others feared a drawn-out conflict. At the podium, the HOA president read aloud Evelyn's complaints one by one. She described Liam's garden gnomes as tacky, accused him of playing music too loudly on weekends, and even claimed that his new birdbath violated aesthetic guidelines. When it was Liam's turn, he stepped forward, voice steady, and presented his defense. He explained each complaint's lack of substance, referencing HOA bylaws that required specific criteria for violations, criteria Evelyn's allegations clearly did not meet. Liam then introduced the most damning piece of evidence, the security footage from his front yard camera. On the screen, the community saw Evelyn herself surreptitiously tapping into his private well, siphoning water for her own landscaping. They saw her brandishing a phone, recording Liam's interactions with officers. And they witnessed the moment she swung a hammer at his solar panels before being restrained by a neighbor. The juxtaposition of Evelyn's petty grievances against Liam's solid documentation of her wrongdoing left the audience in stunned silence. Some board members whispered that they had suspected Evelyn of exaggeration, but the footage confirmed it beyond doubt. A motion was swiftly passed to dismiss all pending complaints from Evelyn, with a notation that her actions violated the HOA's harassment policy. A formal letter would be sent to Evelyn, warning that any further false complaints would result in fines and possible expulsion from the association. Evelyn's face flushed as the board chair read the motion. She attempted to interject, but the gavel came down before she could utter a word. The meeting ended with polite applause for Liam's thoroughness and a palpable sense that the community had finally rallied behind fairness over entitlement. In the days that followed, word of the HOA's decisive action spread. Evelyn found her social standing in Cedarview Commons diminished. Neighbors who once nodded along to her criticisms now avoided her gaze. The community gardens flourished without fear of sabotage, and Liam's birdbath and solar panels received admiring glances rather than disapproving stares. Though the sting of Evelyn's false accusations lingered, Liam took solace in the restored harmony. Yet Liam knew the battle had broader implications. He contacted the local police chief to commend Officer Diaz and Officer Nguyen for their professional handling of the false 911 call. He also offered to speak at the next HOA orientation about the importance of evidence-based enforcement. The experience had taught him that robust documentation and a calm demeanor could neutralize even the most determined harasser. By the end of the month, Cedarview Commons had enacted a new bylaw. Any HOA member found filing more than 2 unfounded complaints in a 6-month period would face automatic review and possible sanctions. The change, inspired by Liam's ordeal, aimed to protect residents from malicious or frivolous enforcement. As for Evelyn, she retreated into a more private life. Her previous cloud evaporated. The final chapter of this saga saw her garden lights dimmed, her water source cut off, and her doorbell left unanswered. Meanwhile, Liam resumed his peaceful routine, tending to his solar panels, practicing his saxophone by the patio, and looking forward to his brother Milo's wedding, secure in the knowledge that justice and community solidarity had prevailed. In the days following Margaret Hale's decisive removal from Willow Glen's HOA, the neighborhood began to heal. Victor Lang, who had endured her relentless complaints, finally felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He spent early mornings tending to his garden. Once a battleground for Margaret's petty regulations, now blooming freely under the warm sun. The solar panels on his roof, once damaged by her late-night vandalism, had been repaired, their gleaming surfaces reflecting a sense of renewal. While the community's formal apology still hung in the HOA's minutes, neighbors spoke of Victor with genuine warmth. One couple stopped by his gate, offering fresh-baked bread and a simple, "thank you." Another waved as he walked past, commenting on how much more pleasant the streets felt without Margaret's watchful eye. Victor smiled politely, feeling a surge of gratitude for the solidarity shown by his peers. Meanwhile, Officer Park and Officer Liu, who had once been drawn into Margaret's false allegations, received commendations for their fair-minded approach. Though they'd initially responded to her frantic 911 calls, they'd remained professional, verifying Victor's credentials and ultimately protecting him from an unjust escalation. The local police chief personally praised their adherence to protocol, reinforcing the department's commitment to impartial service. In the informal gatherings that followed, backyard barbecues and Sunday potlucks, Margaret's antics became the stuff of cautionary tales. Parents used her story to teach children about respect and the importance of empathy. Neighborhood watch signs now bore a small disclaimer: "Let's keep our community safe and kind, no room for harassment." Victor, taking advantage of the newfound peace, resumed his saxophone practice on the porch each evening. The mellow notes drifted across Willow Glen, a soundtrack of resilience and renewal. He often paused mid-phrase, reflecting on how a simple hobby once fueled Margaret's ire, yet now symbolized the harmony she had tried to destroy. Though Margaret had moved on, relocating to a distant suburb to escape the notoriety, her absence resonated. Willow Glen residents felt both relief and a renewed sense of unity. They'd learned that a single disruptive individual could poison the communal well, but also that collective vigilance and respect could restore the neighborhood spirit. For Victor, the experience had been both challenging and instructive. He had discovered the power of calm determination and meticulous evidence in defending one's rights. He also realized the importance of community bonds, how neighbors looking out for each other could check unwarranted authority and protect the collective good. As the sun set on another tranquil evening in Willow Glen, Victor closed his saxophone case and walked back inside, the gentle breeze carrying the echo of his melody. His home, once besieged by harassment, now stood as a testament to resilience, community solidarity, and the quiet triumph of dignity over prejudice. Life at Pine Hill Estates began to settle into a comfortable routine after Diane Mitchell's departure. Jamal Torres, the homeowner at the center of the drama, found the neighborhood's energy shifting from caution to camaraderie. The once tense sidewalks now echoed with friendly greetings, and neighbors seemed more inclined to help each other rather than engage in petty disputes. Jamal's garden, once the focal point of Diane's complaints, flourished under his attentive care. He'd planted new perennials and installed a solar-powered fountain that glimmered at dusk, features Diane had once criticized as out of character for the neighborhood. Now, those same elements drew admiration. Children played near the fountain's edge, while older residents commented on how peaceful the yard looked. Meanwhile, Officer Evans and Officer Cruz, who had initially responded to Diane's false claims, found themselves in an unexpected role: community liaisons. The police chief, impressed by their balanced handling of the incident, assigned them to a new initiative: neighborhood engagement. They organized a Meet Your Local Officers barbecue at Pine Hills Community Park, inviting residents to ask questions and share concerns in an informal setting. Jamal attended with a polite nod, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. He appreciated the officers' efforts to mend any friction their presence had caused. When someone in the crowd asked about the incident with Diane, Jamal offered a brief, measured account: how her harassment escalated to vandalism, how he defended himself calmly, and how the police ultimately sided with truth over intimidation. The story, recounted with dignity, underscored the importance of due process and respect. On social media, Pine Hill's private neighborhood group buzzed with positive remarks. Some posts reminisced about Diane's antics with a mixture of humor and relief, while others praised Jamal's composure and the officer's fairness. A few neighbors shared photos from the barbecue, capturing laughter and genuine connections between residents and officers. Through it all, Jamal remained modest. He continued his quiet volunteer work at the local community center, teaching self-defense classes and mentoring teens. His presence, once subject to suspicion, now represented resilience and good citizenship. Meanwhile, Pine Hill Estates HOA revised its complaint procedures, adding a clause that any frivolous or malicious filings would be subject to penalties, an institutional safeguard inspired by Diane's litany of baseless claims. In the evenings, Jamal often sat on his front porch, watching the streetlights flicker on. The air carried the faint hum of conversation and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, ordinary sounds that felt precious after the months of conflict. When he thought back to the ordeal, he realized how easily a peaceful environment could be disrupted by prejudice and entitlement, but also how the community's collective response could restore harmony. 2 months later, Oakwood Commons had fully embraced a renewed spirit of unity. Keisha Monroe, the retired detective whose home had been the battleground for Constance Hale's tirades, now enjoyed quiet evenings on her porch without fear of harassment. The entire community, having witnessed the fallout from Constance's false accusations and vandalism, remained vigilant against any repeat of such behavior. Constance, who once wielded HOA bylaws like a weapon, had left the neighborhood in disgrace. She relocated to a distant suburb after her legal troubles mounted, charged with filing a false police report and harassment. The once dominant voice on the HOA board was silenced, and the community garden she'd once derided as messy now thrived under new stewardship. Meanwhile, Officer Grant and Officer Reyes, who had initially responded to Constance's 911 calls, found themselves recognized for their fair, unbiased approach. Their conduct during the incident had been highlighted as exemplary, demonstrating that officers could uphold the law without succumbing to prejudice. They were invited to speak at a regional law enforcement conference about de-escalation tactics and community engagement. Keisha, balancing her days between volunteer work at the senior center and coaching a neighborhood watch program, found her advocacy efforts bolstered by the support she received. Parents brought their children to her self-defense classes, grateful for her guidance and resilience. She often reflected on how a simple act, changing her Wi-Fi password, repairing her fence, or refusing to yield to intimidation, could cascade into a profound lesson in justice and community solidarity. On a sunny Saturday, Oakwood Commons hosted its annual block party. String lights hung between oak trees, and laughter filled the air as neighbors shared potluck dishes and children darted through the yard. Keisha, perched by a lemonade stand, watched as Officer Grant handed out stickers to eager kids, while Officer Reyes chatted amiably with residents about local safety initiatives. The scene encapsulated the transformation. Once, these officers had been drawn into a needless confrontation, now, they were integral parts of a vibrant, cohesive neighborhood. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, Keisha walked over to the community garden, once the site of Constance's mocking jabs. The raised beds brimmed with vegetables and flowers planted by neighbors who had come together to reclaim the space. A plaque near the entrance bore the inscription, Oakwood Commons Community Garden, cultivating unity, rooted in respect. It was a fitting tribute to how the community had grown stronger through adversity. Keisha paused, inhaling the fragrant evening air. The memories of Constance's false claims and the fear they had sparked seemed distant now. In their place stood a renewed sense of purpose, a commitment to fairness, mutual respect, and the shared values that bound Oakwood Commons together. As she joined the festivities once more, Keisha felt a deep gratitude for the journey they'd all taken, from conflict to camaraderie, from suspicion to solidarity. Oakwood Commons had endured its trials, and in doing so, had emerged more resilient and unified than ever.